Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we have Dave with us as well because I forgot to add him to the stream.
You did, yes. I was in the basement then thinking,
was it? We got there. Good evening, guys. How the hell are you on this warm and sticky British evening? We don't get to say that very often in September.
No, I had a feeling it was going to be a late Indian style summer though, since we had such a poor August. It just felt right, didn't it, that it get hot in September?
It rained for a month, straight through. Anyway, this evening we are talking 9/11, because the 20th anniversary for September 11 is actually in just a few short days. So it's Saturday, actually. So let's just get stuck into this because this is a long one. It's one of those events that people always go, where were you when Kennedy was shot? I was -9. So I wasn't even a glint in my dad's eye. Where were the moon landing? But it's one of those seminal events, that happens once in a generation.
Yeah.
Can you guys remember where you were on the big day, on the awful day, to be honest? Damian, how about you, mate?
I think I was off school on the end of the summer holidays for some weird reason, like the weeks being different back in that year. I seem to remember being on the end of the summer holidays or a PD day and just waking up to the news, or BBC News. Yeah, about 10 o'clock-ish.
I was going to say 10 o'clock in the morning. You're such a you're a teenager. I hate you. How about you, Dave?
I remember it very well. Yeah, I was. It was. I had my youngster on that particular day. I was going to visit his grandmother, so I went to visit my mum. I'm pretty sure it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon over here in the UK. Actually, 9 o'clock in the morning over there, but it was 2-ish, about 2 o'clock, wasn't it, over here? And I went into my mum's, and she just had her face was like I'd never seen it before. She's staring at the TV. She's got the TV on, and she said, planes flew into the World Trade Center. So I was like, that's fairly heavy, and the little one sat down with a drink of orange, and then I started to pay attention to the TV just as on the live footage, the second plane hit the South Tower. Yeah, and then I remember spending the rest of the day transfixed at what the appalling scenes of what I was watching, really.
Yeah, I know what you mean with that. I was the same sort of thing. Hi, Tammy, how are you? Just saw you in the comments. I was the sort of same, really, that I actually was back from work and stuff, and I'd been in and around, and I saw it, and I heard it I was in the local shop, and somebody said a plane's gone into the thing, and it must be an accident, but they think it was a passenger plane. So as soon as somebody said they think it's a passenger plane, I was like, well, that's not an accident then. There's no chance in hell that's an accident.
No.
And then I got home. I was the same as you. I got home just in time to turn the news on, just in time for the second plane to go in. And also they're like, not an accident then. And it's like that. I just transfixed by the whole day. I remember my mate phoning me going, "Oh God, you think they think it might collapse? I think it's going to collapse." And I said, "Well, if one goes, they're definitely both going to go just as the first one went." And it was
I remember. For myself, it was very, very similar. It was like when the first one went in, it was just more confusion, and then watching what were going on. There was some bad stuff that were being seen. But when the second plane went in, it was like, yeah, this is no accident. It was obvious then that it was no accident.
Yeah, it's terrible. Steve was supposed to be with us this evening, we should say, but he's having technical issues. I'm having some of my own this evening. Actually, I'm just waiting for my camera to stop working.
I think he's in the chat. He said, Steve.
Yeah, he's in the chat. Hi, Lorraine. Hi, everybody else that's appearing in the stream. So our first sort of quick little topic, because we've got a couple as we go on that are big topics that we'll need to sit on, and we're only going to hit the big things tonight because we'll be here till tomorrow else. Larry Silverstein. So this was an interesting chap, a man that had no experience in real estate. He actually bought the Twin Towers and surrounding buildings. I think we have 4 buildings in the complex. In a deal with a few billion quid just before the attacks, literally about 6 months before, and he quadrupled the insurance policy, the terrorist attack insurance policy. So even though no experience in real estate, he did very well out of this deal. He was actually head of a conglomerate that bought the deal. He didn't actually buy himself. He was like the top guy.
He
What did
also
you guys
claimed
think
for
of?
two. He claimed there were two separate terrorist incidents and claimed twice as well for each of the planes on each of the buildings.
for each one of the towers, yeah, he did.
So
Yeah,
actually, I think he may have actually profited to the tune of double the worth of the buildings because he claimed the entire worth of the two buildings for both of the attacks. Possibly, I'm not sure. Maybe it was half
Yeah.
for each and therefore the full value. But there is something around that, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was two
He-
separate claims for each of the
Mhm.
towers, yeah.
He sued initially, didn't he? Because the insurance people said, "No, you're not having that," and he sued and won. I believe he made 12 billion in profit in the end.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
He then struggled to get the finances to build the new tower, Freedom Tower,
Right.
and he got loads of government grants to build it. Didn't use much of his own money, but did very well out of it. Do you think that's at all suspicious? Because obviously we're going to talk about false flags and whether how much the government maybe did or didn't know about the terror attack on the day. Is Larry's involvement suspicious?
Well, I work in insurance, and this is a textbook case of insurance fraud and requires investigation.
Really?
Yes, increasing an insurance policy just prior to a massive loss. Yes.
It is suspicious, isn't it? What do you think, Dave?
This is exactly what fraud investigators look for.
To be honest, he's absolutely nailed it, hasn't he? Really, with just that one nice erudite statement, it's done. It's
Quadrupled the insurance policy. Quadrupled it. And, no, the man was either a lucky sod alive, knew something, or was a genius. So, okay, then we'll move on from Larry, even though we're going to probably come back to him when we talk about Building 7 a little bit. Because
I was going to say one other thing. There was a phrase, but that does link into more with Building 7, so we can leave that for later.
Yeah, we'll come back to Larry. So the morning of the attacks. Again, we're shooting through these bits because when we hit Building 7, etc., it gets juicy. So we'll shoot through these a little bit. The morning of the attacks, exercises and mayhem. I'm really bringing this up because we all are probably quite aware that there are actually a bunch of exercises being played out on the morning of September 11th, 2001. A lot of them was actually basically what happened on the day. The exercise mirrored what happened quite closely. Multiple attacks on multiple areas within the US government and attacking things like the White House and the CIA and things. They evacuated places like the CIA headquarters and the Department of Defense and things like this because they thought these might be attacked. So basically they evacuated all the buildings that would be in charge of like gathering intelligence. Aircraft were sent out to sea instead of to where they actually needed to be because they were following the exercise protocol instead of what actually was needed. Massive confusion, massive mayhem. Reminds me of 7/7. Dave, what do you think?
Was that to me?
Yes, please, Dave. I'm gonna go backwards and forwards, and then I'm gonna forget halfway through who I spoke to last.
Absolutely fine. That's not a problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, mirroring what was actually going on during the exercise. Now, I said to you before, I'm going to try and control myself by trying to stick to the notes that I've made, but it's going to be difficult, that one, because this isn't in my notes, this particular part. But it was a potential threat, and what would have been is as if a bomber had been stolen, a B-1 bomber that would then be flown out to sea and land on an island like somewhere like Cuba, which is why a lot of things were deployed offshore at the time of the actual attacks. Now no, come on, Dave, behave now. I'll behave, right? Okay. So the first one, it's such a big topic. There were two main exercises going on in the day, which is Vigilant Guardian and Global Guardian. And the Vigilant Guardian one, it was NORAD's. Was mainly NORAD's exercise for a supposed war to see what they could actually do during the war and attack, bombing, things like that upon the United States. Now they will be able to retaliate. And it was an imagined Russian bomber attack on the US. So the Vigilant Guardian included bomber and intercontinental ballistic missile responses. So there was missile silos were on alert, bomber command was on alert. And the old principle of it was that it was about hijacked plane, but NORAD and various other command centers and airfields didn't know what type of plane it was. It was an unknown plane type to them, and that they would potentially have to scramble and intercept this plane, which is again why there was so much confusion. Well, there's more about it. The Global Guardian caused the most amount of confusion, which was the exercise about how the US could respond to an actual nuclear attack. But we'll go into that a little bit later, because that includes certain aircraft that were in the sky, military aircraft that were in the sky that were actually militarized passenger aircraft. There were 747-200s, which the military call E4Bs, which are like command comsec type planes were in the skies above the
command and control aircraft. Yeah.
Is that the one? That's the one that's got the big circular thing on the top of it.
Yeah, no, it's either Hawkeye or no, sometimes they do, to be fair, but no, they're particularly modern because it's a digital warfare. They act like almost like flying satellites, sort of thing. They're information hubs. The things you're talking about, like the smaller ones are Hawkeye. I forget what the big one's called. They're the actual.
My name myself, yeah.
Then actually like the radar station, so that would be part of a grid. There'd be 3 or 4 of them connected to one of these command and control aircraft.
Well, you see, NORAD was sort of were controlling Vigilant Guardian, and Stratcom was controlling Global Guardian. Stratcom Strategic Command, they're responsible for the readiness of all nuclear forces within the USA. So a massive exercise, and this exercise was designed to last for 2 weeks. Both of these exercises were running at the same time, so concurrently, and were supposed to last for 2 weeks, and they were around about a week into each of the exercises when the attacks on 9/11 took place.
Which is just crazy. I mean, there's loads of reports in there about how people scramble around going, is this an exercise? Is this real?
Well, involved fake radar dots, didn't it, inserted onto NORAD's defense system as part of the exercises, which is what caused the real confusion on the day. Seems very convenient to me, and also very convenient that they used the same excuse on 7/7, where they had a third-party company, didn't they, running an exercise doing the exact same thing, which was also mirroring the exact events of 7/7 on the same day. I don't know. That's a bit too coincidental over 2 big major terrorist attacks for me for there to be no coincidence, to be honest.
Well, they were fighting. They were fighting a fictional enemy during Global Guardian called Slamonia, which was supposedly a rogue Asian state that had nuclear capability, and they had bombers, missile crews, and submarines were all taking part in this. All senior military leaders were involved in it, joint chiefs of staff, everything, and Stratcom was at a heightened state of alert during the exercise, and didn't. In fact, the state of alert hasn't come down since 9/11, which is interesting. And the National Command Authority were also involved in it, which is pretty much the President and the Secretary of Defense. So, some pretty big wigs. And Barksdale, in my notes, I've got here that Barksdale Air Force Base had B-52s loaded with real nuclear weapons that were ready to deploy during this exercise, though the triggers weren't armed. Still. And it's 9 a.m.
That's
when
a bit
the command staff...
Why would you use live nukes with unarmed triggers? It just defeats the point of using the live nukes in the first place.
Exactly. Well,
part of the exercise, though, I think, mate, they will use that because they're not having the safety, not having the trigger in place is a safety measure. But in every other respect, you have to use it as a real nuke.
Okay,
so
all right.
All the policies, the procedure is still the same. So, and I think it makes that slightly real world feeling for the the ground crew. They're like,
that makes sense.
Nuke. Careful, guys, don't drop it.
Yeah, I mean, they're still not doing any kind of level of deployment or using them without key codes and from President and the Secretary of Defense, which is your National Command Authority anyway. But even though they called off the drill, they left them B-52s fully armed and with the crews waiting to go on the runway while the events of 9/11 were playing out. From 9 a.m. onwards, Stratcom ended the exercise, ended the drill, but the B-52s remained armed and on the runway. Okay, them E4Bs that I'm talking about, the 3 of them in operations command planes were in the sky at the time of the attack, and their nickname was Doomsday. So I don't know if you're talking about them ones. And it was when even after that was called off. So you got the B-52 on the B-52s with nuclear weapons on the runway at Barksdale, and you've also got the E4Bs still in the skies even after everything's been called off. And I believe it was a guy called Lieutenant General Thomas Keck, who was the commander of the 8th Air Force at Barksdale Air Force Base, thought it was part of the simulation when he got told that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, because it was about rogue planes and things going on, and attacks on major areas, allegedly, within the United States in the infrastructure of both commerce and control. Nearly finished, 1 second. Because the exercise as well, and this Global Guardian also contained communication outages, simulated communication outages. So when the messages weren't coming through about exactly what was going on during the attack to Stratcom, to NORAD and to NEADS and various others, they thought it was all part of the drill because they were expecting to have lack of communication. In fact, he was approached by a younger officer who he then berated, saying that's not how you do the drill. This younger officer had come over to him, a junior officer, I beg your pardon, to tell him that the US was under attack, to which he replied, "Is you're not sticking by the drill," and went on a tirade. So there you go. And
he was recently promoted as well into the post. He'd only been promoted about a week before or something silly, which is also new.
And by early afternoon, most personnel involved in the exercise that they only had very basic information about the attacks that had been taking place. And NORAD closed its door. You said before about that closing the structure down and everything. Well, NORAD closed its doors for the first time, protecting its operations center from a proposed nuclear attack. These are 3 foot thick reinforced steel doors, by the way. So just a few facts about what was going on Global Guardian. Whether it's relevant or not, don't know. But I made notes about it, so you're having it.
Well, the other thing about NORAD was apparently you can hear there are video recordings out there or voice recordings out there and saying of people running around literally going, "How do we turn off the simulation?" Because they couldn't figure out how to switch the simulation. Apparently, the simulations are running a program. You pretty much press go, and it runs through the simulation. And they're desperately running around going, "How do we turn it off? How do we turn it off?" Right. Just like it slowed down. You would think because they were in a area of in a heightened state because they're on this simulation that they would almost be able to react quicker. It's like, we're all here, great, let's go. But actually it slowed everything way down. And then the first thing they did was evacuate CIA headquarters, evacuate the Homeland Security headquarters, basically completely removing their ability to respond, to have intelligence gathering.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to dive in. Sorry, Dame. I'll give us a sec, man. I'll pass it over to you anyways. I'm pretty sure that they didn't start evacuating the White House and Capitol Hill until the third plane hit the Pentagon. So there were still people in the Capitol building. At this, even though the second tower had been hit. So, I think there's not so much confusion, but people think that as soon as the World Trade Centers got hit, that the White House was evacuated and so on and so on. It wasn't. That wasn't the case. It's only when, the third plane slammed into the Pentagon, I was like, hey, up, wait a minute. And I think the projected flight path for the fourth plane, the one that went down in Pennsylvania,
in
was the White House,
That was why it was shot down.
Let's roll. I was watching a documentary just a few days ago and saying even the people on Air Force One believe that aircraft was shot down. They literally just given permission. The president was basically asked, if we have an aircraft in space, can we shoot it down? Can we shoot down a civilian aircraft? Permission was given, and then the news that aircraft had been shot down. So they're on the on Air Force One thinking their own aircraft had been shot down. Now let's jump ahead a little bit, but it's not actually in our schedule. If that aircraft was shot down, do you really think it? Anyone? I think they shot that aircraft down and have lied about it because they didn't want to admit it.
Correct.
And they didn't want to admit that's what they'd done. Do you actually think if they had just said, "Yeah, it was heading towards the White House, we had to shoot it down. We wish we hadn't, but we had no choice," anybody would have even batted an eyelid? I think that would have been acceptable loss, wouldn't it?
Government always goes on plausible deniability, though. But at least they tell you the better, and then you haven't. You know what I mean? You can't hold them to anything.
I think the alternative. I'm not saying whether I thought it was shot down or not with this next statement. I'm just purely making a statement. Is if it had impacted the White House or wherever it was going, the US response afterwards would have been completely different. It would have been the first time in history that a president would have been making a briefing regarding national security not sat in the White House in hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So it would have been such a huge thing. It's so much more.
Wasn't the last time
different.
when the British burnt it down?
Like I say, when we burnt it down.
good old fashioned arson by the Brits there.
Nice house. You're not having it. Burn that.
You will drink our tea.
Exactly. Right. Well, let's move on to the first big subject.
Oh, I was just gonna. One thing I wanted to say though, back on the the software that they were using, and once they switched it on, and I really would have thought that the government would have managed to have put an off switch in the brief, the specification for the third party software developers that were outsourced the operations.
Just lazy.
Yeah, well, or complete incompetence, and I do believe that the government is full of the latter, so it could well be complete incompetence.
The Americans aren't good at remembering to put in off switches. I mean, if you remember during the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, we invaded. Obviously, we'd actually given Iraq a bunch of air defense systems. The British and the Americans had. So when we the first Gulf War, we were going, well, we're going to attack. The British were like, would you like us to turn the air defense systems off? And the Americans were like, what? And it's like, oh yeah, we've got back doors into the software. We'll just turn them off. And the Americans went, wish we thought of that. They're not good at remembering backdoor, turn off switches.
So people weapons with an off switch. We're clever.
Yeah.
I love it.
Back them up. The Twin Towers. The collapse of the Twin Towers. So, 2 aircraft weighed about 50 to 70 tons each, empty. So actually more than that with fuel and everything on, slammed into these 2 buildings. In theory, the steel that was used to build these structures was at least 3 times stronger than they needed to be. They were designed with this sort of incident in mind. The temperatures, in theory, inside the Twin Towers only reached around 600 degrees centigrade, but we see pouring molten metal from the holes before the collapse. Was the Twin Towers, and I was going to put the question out there straight, was the Twin Towers collapse a controlled demolition? Small, easy question, but quite difficult to answer. Who wants to go first? Go on, Damian.
Damian should, because I'm going to have a proper rant about this one when it's my turn. Go on, Damian.
Personally, I believe yes. I think that it's more plausible than the official pancake theory or anything produced in the NIST report of how it all happened. There's too many anomalies. The nanothermite found in dust collected by various scientific companies from the Twin Towers, the strange coming and goings of security personnel for weeks, months, even leading up to it, where they believe that they possibly could have planted explosives in the building containing this nanothermite. You look at some of the companies that are involved. Kroll Associates took over the security, which are heavily linked to the Bush family. There's just the more you dig, the more connections you find to the same people, to the same families.
Mm-hmm. I always think it's interesting what happened to the steel after 9/11 when they very
shipped
quickly put it on the back of trucks and shipped it off to China.
24 hours. I think it was 24 hours, all gone. Because that's what you do after a crime. You get rid of all the evidence. Helps you find the criminal really well.
Go on then, Dave. Give us a go.
Right. You ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Do I think... I think that it's not about what I think. I think it's about what the people in the side chat think and the message that, if there is indeed a message that we're trying to put across, which I like to think that we do. Now, again, I've made some notes about this because I think they're very pertinent regarding the fires, to sort of like back off what you think. Now, the problem is regarding... a lot of people confuse temperature with heat. They're not the same thing. They're related. They are related, but they're not the same thing. Thermodynamically, heat that's contained within material is related to the temperature throughout the surface or rather the object itself. which is a direct result of the heat capacity and density of the object. Okay, and temperature is an intensive property. It's a totally different kind of property than. Bear with me on this. There is a reason I'm saying this, but that does vary with the quantity of the material. So one's a constant, one varies with the quantity. One's a constant at quantity, one varies with the amount. Meaning that the fact that 90,000 liters of jet fuel on a few floors of the World Trade Center, right, doesn't mean that it was an unusually hot fire. It wasn't an unusually hot fire. You know,
see stifled smoke, can't you? Black smoke coming from the towers from the day. That generally implies a lack of oxygen and not a particularly high heat.
Yeah, but you know, black smoke is. You can sort of tell at what stage the fire's at by the color of the smoke. Like you say, you can tell when it's burning. You know, it's burning office materials, when it's burning paper and woods and things like that.
Like the Madrid skyscraper when it burnt as a raging inferno for over 30 hours. That's a fire.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it?
That didn't melt the steel and the building didn't collapse.
There's two types of it, because we're dealing with combustive energy, aren't we? It's a combustive force because of the explosion, and in combustive science, there's three types of flame, three basic types of flame, which is you get like your jet burner. A jet burner is a combustible one, a pre-mixed flame, and a diffuse flame. And the fires at the World Trade Center that we're supposed to believe are responsible for melting the beams and bringing it down were a diffuse flame. It was a diffuse fire that was going on at the time. Everybody knows that it was a fuel-rich environment, and a fuel-rich environment, a diffuse flame will burn for many hours. We know that, but a diffuse flame will go off large amounts of black soot, which we saw with the black smoke that was going on in the World Trade Center. And it's mostly soot generated by incompletely burnt fuel. Now the most of the fuel, jet fuel, was burnt up upon impact.
Yeah.
Hence the giant fireball. These are, you know, it's not like these are puddle jumpers. These are internal flights as well. Remember. So and I've made a couple of notes about something regarding combustive energy. I'll just say it just in case anybody in the side chat sort of gets on why this is relevant. And it says factors such as flame volume and quantity of soot decrease the radiative heat loss in the fire, moving the temperature closer to the maximum of 1,000 degrees centigrade. However, it's highly unlikely that the steel at the World Trade Center experienced temperatures above 750 to 800 degrees centigrade or Celsius. So all reports that the steel melted at 1,500 degrees are massively out.
It would have been good if someone had a thermal camera on it on the day, wouldn't it? And just recording the temperatures.
Well, you say like
that'd be Captain Hindsight here, but anyway.
No, it's a very relevant thing to say, isn't it? I mean, there's also another one is structural steel begins to soften at around 425 degrees Celsius and loses about half of its strength at 650 degrees Celsius. Remember the number what Jamie mentioned before, 600. Now, structural steel loses half of its strength at 650 degrees. So, and this is why steel is stress relieved in that temperature range. But even at a 50% loss of strength, it's still insufficient to explain the World Trade Center collapse. It's not. They would have been still structurally strong enough to maintain the, you know, enough presence to be able to maintain its structural integrity, if you like.
Yeah, if it was built to survive or designed with a plane impact in mind, as it supposedly was, you'd have thought they'd have to build it to take multiples of its own weight, not just twice. It'd be like
at least 3 times stronger than
16 times its own weight, or so you know, so that it could absorb the impact of a plane.
It's saying that even with its strength halved, it should be able to absorb 2 to 3 times the stress that was imposed by the fire. This is the structural steel. So even at half the strength, it still should have been able to withstand 2 to 3 times the energy that we're led to believe brought it down. Just saying.
Yeah.
There's a lot of girders in the Rebel, wasn't there, though, that were with the like a diagonal cut through them, sticking out the ground or sticking out at angles, and that looks like controlled demolition and potentially nanothermite used, doesn't it?
The couple of points I'd like to make. Like, first of all, these are not normal buildings, and you know we're talking 110 stories. There's lots of stories about other fires and other buildings and other steel frame buildings and the steel frame stands. Those buildings suffered a fire. This building suffered 2 aircraft hitting them at 500 miles an hour. A significant impact, an impact so severe that it was reported on the 30th floor, 70, I think it was like 50 something stories below where the aircraft hit, that people couldn't open doors because the frame of the building had literally shifted. So the doors had become wedged in the door frames. That is a massive impact and would have done significant damage. The temperatures also, I mean, there was a theory that I quite liked, actually, that it's possible that there was almost like a funnel or like a blast furnace effect, that the fire, when the plane hit, material from above collapsed onto the aircraft where it was burning and created like a blast furnace effect. So even though the external temperature appeared to only be about 600 degrees, internally it might have been much, much hotter. And the problem with aluminium, or aluminum for our American friends, because I can't say it correctly, is that when aluminium burns, or it can physically ignite. And when it does, it's horrific.
I've managed to melt aluminium in the garden with a fire in one of those. I had a metal. Must have been made of aluminium, and I've got a massive, branch in there. And
you combust it within an oxygen-rich environment. It'll look like a sparkler. It'll fizz like a sparkler.
Okay. Added water to it as well. It creates a very, very energetic reaction, which is why building military vehicles out of aluminium is a terrible idea, and they really need to stop doing it just because it's light. It doesn't make good armor. That's a completely different subject.
Pretty much, get an aluminium vehicle gets hit pretty much by any kind of armor penetrating round. Any round actually, doesn't it mean you're all dead? Because it when
you get a sprawl effect, and it's very bad. Yeah. But there are some things that are really interesting about the reports on the attack on the day. One story is that actually there was a massive explosion in the basement of the North Tower.
Yeah,
but a lot of reports suggest it happened before the impact. One of the things that explosion did was actually take out the water main that fed the surrounding buildings and the tower. So there was very, very little water pressure in the sprinkler system. There was only basically what was in the pipe, if you can follow me.
Yeah.
Which would run out within 30 seconds to a minute, probably, wouldn't it? Depending on, I suppose, how much pipe. Yeah, there is, but.
So you could argue
without pressure, it wouldn't get to that. Sorry, I was just going to say, without any kind of residual pressure. Sorry, without any pressure, even the residual water within the pipes would still fall under gravity. They're forced around the system by pressure, aren't they? That's how they work. You bleed a radiator, you just undo the plug, it falls out. It doesn't stay where it is because there's nothing keeping it in place. And once they're cracked, once they've gone, the water goes down. It follows gravity.
Indeed,
but
very true.
You could argue, though, that if you wanted to make sure these towers burned and collapsed, take out the source of, take out the water, take out the sprinkler system. And there is some argument to say that's also why, when we talk about Building 7, why Building 7 collapsed, because this water main was taken out.
I think there was like a firefighter or a policeman that was in the basement when one of the explosions went off, and he said a piece of the wall came out and hit him in the face, and he's got facial scars, hasn't he, from the piece of the basement wall exploding into his face. Yeah. I'm not sure of his name, but it's some footage that I've seen of a survivor.
Yeah, I've seen. I know the one you're on about.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of elements, but I keep going back to the point there as well that this is not a normal building. These buildings were designed to be very flexible for a start, because winds could we're actually worried that winds could blow it down. It was one of the first times a building this tall was ever constructed. It was the world's tallest building when it was built. It was built with a new modular design that was supposed to maximize office space in a way that hadn't really been done before. It should also be said that within 20 years, they were talking about potentially having to rip these buildings down. They were worried that they weren't meeting building codes and building regs, and they said they were going to have to spend billions to get these buildings up to code.
Yeah.
Which makes
So-
Larry Silverstein's decision to buy the buildings and then put an extremely high insurance premium in place for terrorist attacks even more suspect.
Yeah, exactly. Bazza makes a really good point there as well, that apparently there was significant gold bullion in the basement in several large vaults.
There was a van that got caught, didn't it? It got stuck on a fallen brace from the floor above, and then it got stuck on it, and it was full of gold in the back. They found that, didn't they?
The thing about that is, he took it. It was a 99-year lease he took on that. I know that they were looking at updating them because they were up to spec, but he we sort of covered a little bit earlier about he wasn't like he was ever going to worry about that. But it's 62 billion. Somebody did he get out of it all told? Something like that. 62 billion. But it was a 99-year lease he took 6 months before the World Trade Center attacks. 62 billion people.
It's all just too much coincidence for my liking. And once you start getting multiple coincidences, the statistical chance of them being coincidences is pretty much zero, or it's pushing towards zero.
Struggling with it, don't we? But I think my point would be is just I don't go as I'm not going to go as far as saying that these buildings collapsed and it's got to have been a controlled demolition. I do think two very large jetliners hitting quite high up in these buildings, and once you start getting that concertina effect, once they did collapse, they reckon there's something like 100,000 tons worth of weight above where the aircraft hit. Once you get that concertina effect, once it starts going, the forces are just unbelievable.
Well, that's a matter of conjecture, isn't it? That among a lot of architects, that whether that is actually the case, or whether it would actually slow down due to resistance rather than momentum. That once the initial collapse or once the initial falling of the floor would start, it would actually start to get slowed down. Debris would start to fall to others. Well, let's not go into the ejective bits of debris that were found 370 meters away, horizontally out from the sides.
Massive beams,
you know what I mean?
Wedged into buildings 600
meters.
meters
In itself doesn't eject steel girders 300 meters out the side. You need some kind of horizontal force to create that, along with the gravitational force downwards, to then give obviously a bit of a horizontal length before it falls and hits the ground.
But I would argue force coming down like that, concertina and a piece of metal goes twang.
No, but they pretty much fell at free fall speed, so you could drop a tennis ball off of the top of them and it would have hit the floor at the same time through the greatest path of resistance. That's just the physics. No.
Yeah, that's not really true though. As the collapse happened, they were slowing.
Yeah, they were slightly off free fall speed, but not very much.
No, not a great deal.
And when you've got, what was it? I don't know, 100. What did you say? 100,000 tons of steel or whatever it was. I don't know. In total in the building or whatever. It shouldn't be that easy for it to just go at near free fall speed. That you should see some kind of structural failure in certain parts of the building more than others, and you should see it lean but to collapse into its own footprint. And then you've got building 7.
Why didn't the top bit of the building? It was leaning right over, but then it started leaning right over like that, and then went boom straight down into its own footprint.
Yeah,
why did it just break and fall?
Well,
why didn't it just take out a chunk of the building? Why did it?
World Trade Center 1 sort of did collapse vertically. World Trade Center 2, you sort of did see the top come away and then start to come down.
It was almost 40 degrees before it collapsed.
Building 7, though, is the real one where you see the classic pinch as it blows out.
Stop right there. Bite
We're
your
going to that.
We'll get to that. Jesus, don't jump.
Premature communication again.
Sorry.
Well, just the final chapter, Damian.
with the type of energy that you're talking about, to eject some of these beams hundreds of meters, that's not down to collapse. That's not down to structural collapse or impact energy. For the weight of some of these beams to be ejected hundreds of meters, I mean, I know what you're saying, that as things are coming down, it should protrude or fly out a little bit and stuff like that, but streets away.
600 meters. One beam that weighed 13 tons was found spearing a building 600 meters away. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Well,
it makes you wonder
Sorry.
whether the forces within the building collapsing could possibly cause that kind of horizontal. And I think it's unlikely. There was a Dutch demolition company, wasn't there? He was like one of the world experts on it, that came out and said that all of them were controlled demolitions in his opinion. And didn't he end up? Didn't he end up getting?
I think he
Oh,
was suicided.
he ended up dead, didn't he? Somehow, I don't know how. I can't remember, but I'm sure he ended up dead.
Yeah, he was suicided. The one thing I would say is one of the sad things about this as well is in the few months before 9/11, they were actually doing a massive project to improve the fireproofing and remove asbestos from the building. They'd only got to about the 5th floor, though. Some people have argued, and I would actually agree with them, that actually we had people going in and out of this building every day and working in the lift shafts. If you were going to create a controlled demolition, you actually had people in there free roaming the building at night, every night for 3 or 4 months before the demolition. People have argued that it can't be a demolition. It would take hundreds of meters of cordite rope and all these sort of things and all these things. And I'm like, just for like we're going to say exactly the same for building 7. Very much depends on how you want to just demolish a building. Do you want to do it nice and safely, or do you want just the building to fall down? If you just want the building to fall down, you could probably do it quite messy and quite quickly. But the really sad side effect of this story is that almost more people have died of cancer in New York following 9/11 than actually died on 9/11 because of the asbestos. The building was literally vaporized. Every concrete level was vaporized, and we've all seen those photos of just smoke just filling the island, Manhattan Island. The famous photo of that Asian lady covered in dust, it's just quite a famous image. She died within 6 years of 9/11 from leukemia.
They almost like
thousands of others.
The dust and the smoke coming off, don't they, to a pyroclastic flow?
Yeah, it was very similar to like a volcano had gone off. Yeah,
that's what it looks like.
You see, the thing is, you still need energy, right? You still need energy to propel and project these objects. If it was in a freestanding space and collapsed within its own footprint, if one of them towers collapsed within its own footprint, the debris would be spread over a certain area. There's a formula I'm sure you can find if you really want to figure it out. But to be ejected hundreds of meters, it would still need energy. And I don't think inertia is powerful enough to rock some of the slabs and some of the things that were found hundreds of meters. And if it fell into its own footprint, as it went down and they were projected or ejected due to the force of the collapse, they will be thrown out laterally, yes, as they got further down towards the floor. And then you would expect to find them embedded into the sides of building immediately around Liberty Street, West Street, and Vesey Street. But these are streets away. There was, like hundreds and hundreds of meters. This is New York City. This is downtown Manhattan.
It's almost like you're proposing an unknown explosive force capable of shifting that metal horizontally.
It's not like it was a completely open field where objects from the top of the building could end up hundreds of meters over there. When it fell down in a practically straight line, and you're a bit like a mushroom cloud but without the top part, but the bottom you will see would roll across the floor, the pyroclastic cloud, as Damon was like going to before. In that would be debris under the force of the entire weight of the structure collapsing into dust as well. It's been complete. It's dust. It's all dust, apart from the bits that were ejected miles and miles away, hundreds of meters. Dramatize that. Just dust.
Oh,
just dust.
Some of the emergency staff said the biggest thing they found were like little like 1-2 numbers off a keypad off of an office telephone, but miraculously they found that hijacker's passport. But anyway,
we've just had that mentioned. We'll come back to the building in a sec. But Fac, you keep jumping ahead, Fac. So
I've been seeing everybody in the side chat it's like, yeah, but what about this? What about this? It's like we've got them. They are there. We're gonna come to these ones.
We'll get to it. Keep comment on what we're talking about. It's scrolling across the bottom. This passport was found. The passport I always think is really interesting because the CIA found it. It was handed into a police officer on the thing. They had it within a few hours. The CIA looked at that and realized it had been forged in a way used by Al Qaeda. And they used that. That was the link they had within 24 hours to Al Qaeda, and then Osama bin Laden, who we'll talk about a bit later, I'm sure, was basically fingered for this by Evening News.
Yeah, within
Damn
12.
quick. All because that passport survived and was found. Allegedly. Right. Two things I'm going to mention about the things. I'm going to ask you, first of all, about your opinions on squibs. Dave.
I think there are a lot of architects, there are a lot of engineers that have watched the collapse of the World Trade Centers and WTC. I'm not mentioning it because everybody in the side chat will get excited. the number after 6 and before 8. That are massively like concerned about these little puffs of smoke that you do indeed see. There also appears to be flashes, a couple of floors underneath where the fire is or where the impact zone was, and they do seem to be almost uniform in the gaps between them. Now, yes, as floors pancake, objects, debris, bits of dust, smoke, flames can be ejected laterally from each of the floors as the preceding floors collapse upon them. Yeah.
Yep.
But many first responders, unfortunately, a lot of them will be second and third responders, but let's not get too, reported hearing the sounds of explosions, not the crash of floor hitting floor. They also heard that. They heard that sound. They could differentiate between the two sounds of floors pancaking and the sounds of what seem to be controlled explosions, as of demolitionists, as of structural engineers, and as of architects. Go on, Damo, sir.
Even the mainstream media were on it on the day, if you remember. On the day they were on it, explosions was all over many news channels. Although you'll notice that you try and search for a lot of the media back from the day then, and a lot of the stuff that suggests anything other than the official version of events seems to be very difficult to come across. But anything that goes with the Osama bin Laden narrative is still there.
The other thing I would say was, for me, the squibs, either here or there. Okay, they look a bit like the sort of explosions you see from a controlled demolition, but I'm also thinking there is a massive ton of hundreds of thousands of tons of weight compressing. You've already got a building that's damaged in several places because of the impact, and you can see that the squibs are just before the sort of pancake effect. I think that could just as, and again, playing devil's advocate, that could just as easily be compression and just windows failing as this force of what is coming, but at the same time, those windows were built to withstand, hurricane winds and things. This is one of the reasons why some people couldn't get out, was because they couldn't break the windows to get out. So I don't know. Last thing on then, before we move on from the towers, what do you guys think about those images? Have you ever seen those images? There's when they are removing all the steel after months later, and they've got the big cranes going in and they're grabbing chunks of steel, and as they grab the beams out, they spontaneously burst into flames. There was thousands of degrees of temperature. So, satellite images of months later, that there was still 2,000 or 3,000 degrees centigrade in places in the footprint of where the buildings collapsed. Do you think that tells us anything?
I would like to know the fuel responsible for generating that heat for so long after the event, after both the combustible jet fuel had gone up, which was the main source of ignition, and also really there's very little contained within not just the planes but the structure as well that could generate the heat that was in the wreckage, and for it to be burning weeks afterwards. You could pick it up on thermal satellite imagery.
Months after.
Months after it. It was jet fuel. There is a constant heat that we know jet fuel burns at. Steel, we know the properties of the, and structural engineers do, architects know the property of the building and the contents within. And it doesn't seem to marry up with the temperatures that were at ground zero for so long after the event. Damo. What you got, brother?
I just noticed a comment. The fact seems to be on it tonight in the chat. He's all saying that William Bill Cooper mentioned that Bin Laden would be blamed for the big event pre 9/11, and I do remember that. I've listened to that. It was a radio show program that he did. I don't know, maybe 6 months or to a year, something like that, before 9/11, and basically predicted a major terrorist attack and that Bin Laden was going to be blamed for it. It's quite a big prediction to make, and then it occurs within a relatively short period.
I reckon Fact likes reading things like "Behold a Pale Horse" and things like that. No doubt.
Yeah, good book. Anyway, we're moving on. We did a video on Big Bill, and
yeah,
strange guy. Right, Twin Towers. Next section: Building 7 and the psychic BBC. Let's get the BBC out the way first, because this kind of winds me up a little bit. So the BBC announced the Building 7 had collapsed, and as the reporter sat there with a live stream on her green screen behind her, you can see Building 7 stood fine. So they predicted Building 7's collapse 30 to 40 minutes before it actually did.
Yeah.
Psychic?
Yep.
Yes.
Done.
Or being fed the news and just got fed it a little bit too early.
That can be the only reason.
Well,
it was
seems
not
the most
just a
plausible
mistake.
reason, doesn't it? Or the most likely.
Not a mistake. Not just an accident. Not just, like a lot of, it's a fluid situation.
Yeah,
they was talking about
because the event hadn't occurred yet. You're announcing an event before it's occurred. The building's collapsed. No, it hasn't.
The video feed was live on the green screen. Apparently, the video feed was live as she was making that statement. And in that live video feed, people, WTC7 was nice and erect, as Frankie might say. Ooh,
Now, you could maybe argue if maybe it wasn't live. Maybe it was on a half an hour delay, but it was supposedly live.
I would accept that. I would accept that if it wasn't for the case that was it CBS also reported the collapse in advance. Everybody gets on the BBC, but I think there was also a station in the US what reported it as well early. Prematurely. Was it CBS or something? Can somebody say in the chat? But I'm fairly sure.
I'm not sure. I didn't know that an American channel had done that. To be honest, but I mean, the CIA's infiltrated pretty much most of American media, so it's quite easy for them to control the media and what goes out.
Definitely. Just want to make a quick point here, because in fact, you say about the mini nuke theory and directed energy weapon theory. I'm going to talk about this a bit later when we talk about the Pentagon theory. If you're going to have an attack like this, you want to keep it simple. You really don't need to use directed super energy weapons or theoretical mini nuclear weapons when we do have explosives and thermite. Keep it simple would always be my theory if you're going to plan plan an attack like this.
Okay.
Dave, you're going to say something.
Yeah, sorry, brother. Sorry, I'm sorry. I get excited about this myself,
but
it was CNN. It was CNN. I did put it in my notes. This is what happens if I don't go with my notes. I have to guess and stuff like that. But the notes, yes, it was. I had it a second ago. It was reported early by Jane Stanley from BBC. BBC was Jane Stanley who reported that, and CNN anchorman Aaron Brown both reported the collapse of the World Trade Center 7 ahead of the time, despite the fact that the building was still standing in both live feeds in the background.
I don't think this is the smoking gun, people. I think it is. I think in a fluid situation like this, mistakes are made. And a lot of news reporters they come through routers and things like that.
Before it's happened.
Yeah,
I just don't understand
because it's a mistake.
That's not a mistake.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't take 40 minutes. It doesn't take a 40-minute uplink to a satellite, Jay.
That's preempting what's going to happen.
I just know people saying, and the other thing is, I think the news was feeding through. I think it's just as likely, I should say, that the news was feeding through that this building was going to collapse. It's one of the most fluid situations that probably the news report ever seen, and they just misconstrued it and they reported the wrong information.
No, I remember it on the day. In hindsight, it can easily appear that way, but on the day, there was nothing said about it. It was still, it was still there. It was there was nothing. It collapsed. So why report it twice?
Yeah.
Why report it again 40 minutes or nearly an hour after? Oh, no, sorry. Now the World Trade Center 7 is collapsed. Why not in all other feeds? Because I'm pretty sure that with a lot of news companies, if it's cheaper for them to actually rent or buy footage of other people, or buy streams or rent streams from other people, rather than having to put reporters on the ground themselves. So they will all take it from the same feed. A lot of people will use the same feeds, especially smaller TV companies, news outlets, things like that. They will take it from the same feed. But with the size of the delay, I mean, I think in live TV broadcasting, is it like a minute, just in case they need to edit something out if somebody
they
swears
tend to
or
delay by
messes
around
up,
a minute.
But yeah,
if somebody swears or whatever. Normally.
This was a good chunk of time. I mean, I don't know where they were sending these video feeds then. It obviously wasn't going via satellite. It must have been going via carrier pigeon, or they were sending it around Pluto and back or something, because it was taking a long time, bro. That's I know what you're saying, and in the fog of trauma and things happening, things can go awry. But
my theory with anything like this is always think of, can human error be involved? So I always try to think like that way, and so. I'm not saying.
Okay, explain how human error was involved.
I think sometimes for me.
How was human error involved? If it hadn't collapsed,
they reported the wrong information.
It collapsed. Yeah, but WTC 7 wasn't hit by a plane, so there shouldn't have been any inkling in any of the news companies that it was going to collapse, because it hadn't suffered the same structural damage from an impact.
Well, okay. Well, that's going on to the next thing then. So,
just one second, though. Can I just say
and the Larry Silver sign saying the decision to pull it.
I know where you might, I know where you might want to go with it, but I will say this, okay? If it didn't go down when they say it was, if they didn't report it in advance and all that, then why bother showing it again later on? Why bother showing it again later on? And if it did, and the feed that they were giving was wrong and incomplete, and it was showing the building still standing, although the words that they were saying were correct and it had fallen, they were just out of time with the live video feed. Why did they not rerun the World Trade Center 7 collapsing straight away as soon as that footage come through and they could rectify it? Why 3/4 of an hour later and announce it again that it's collapsed? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, normally the BBC is quite quick to admit mistakes and publicly own the mistake, aren't they? They're quite good for that.
CNN, how behind the feed are they?
Yeah.
No CNN based in the States?
Yeah, you'd think they'd have been, you wouldn't have thought they'd be that far behind, would you? You could argue us in the UK maybe.
Where they're based, they could look out the window.
But with the fibre optic cables that we've got running between continents probably nowadays to send internet to stuff through the internet, I really don't think it should be that much of an issue anymore. But
as soon as it did go, within seconds they should have been showing that video, whether it was a live feed, whether it was pre-recorded, whether it was whatever. If World Trade Center 7 collapsed when they said it did, or when they announced it did, as soon as possible to that moment, they should have shown it, because they didn't mess about when the planes hit the towers. Apart from the first plane in the tower, when it was the second tower, you saw that live. You started to see different angles or different reports coming in pretty quick after that. In fact, it was the following day when you saw the first the video of the first plane hitting, because of them French brothers that were doing a documentary on the fire department, when Chief Oriol Palmer was testing gas mains in the middle of the street, and the plane flew overhead, and they looked up and saw it.
You did have the CIA going around confiscating all of the footage, didn't they, off of the people in New York that had footage of that day, which was, again, interesting.
And other people literally grabbing reporters going, oh, that looks like what was it? What's the phrase you know, Damien?
What phrase?
Crisis actors that were on the thing, telling people what they'd seen.
Oh yeah, that guy that comes on after the towers have collapsed and goes, oh yeah, the first tower collapsed and then the second, mostly due to structural failure. And it's like,
kept saying the structural failure.
What the hell do you know about structural failure in 100-story buildings?
And you could see a guy in a black suit and a black tie just stood just off him, watching really closely, something like jabbing him in the back, going, "Say structural failure."
I've looked him up. You can find him.
He's Osama bin Laden. Do that as well.
He's an actor. He's got an IMDb page.
Yeah.
You can see all his work if you want to.
It really is true. Fac was asking why Building 7? What was so significant about Building 7? And I think that leads on quite well from what we were just discussing. So I wanted to say.
I'll tell you what, let's just do one other thing first, because then that subject goes into the missing trillions. So we'll do that first. Okay. I'm just going to say the Building 7 collapse. I believe that was a controlled demolition for the reasons we're going to talk about in a second. But I do actually have a theory, and the NIST report came out afterwards and said, well, how did Building 7 collapse? And they basically said there was a structural failure. I think it was on the 13th floor. One main joint collapsed, and that caused a pancake
Column
effect.
79.
A cascade.
Column
failure of the
79.
entire
Column 79, yeah.
Yeah. So that failed. That caused and there's this one column basically went through there. Basically, they were saying that let me finish. That this building had an Achilles heel. Right. So this building had an Achilles heel. When that failed, it caused that column to collapse, and that pulled basically the roof in, and we actually see what we see. We see that pinch effect where the penthouse disappears, and then the building is internally collapse, and that pulls the outside of the building in. I actually think the NIST report have told us exactly how this building was controlled, demolished. One of the main arguments, don't shake your head, I'm not finished. One of the main arguments for saying it's not a controlled demolition is to say, well, you couldn't do it because people would notice all the cordite and all the explosives that have to be set up and all the things that you couldn't do it. Well, the NIST report, if the NIST report is accurate, and this builder did basically have an Achilles heel.
Big if.
Well, if it is, my point is, mate, you need one device. You need to walk in, set up one device in one place where you know this building has an Achilles heel. Do what you've got to do, which we'll talk about in a second, like shredding documents and like crazy and like shredding backboards. And then you just go, boop, bang, the building falls down.
That only works retrospectively, not in advance.
Yeah, but the NIST report could have been based on, they could have accidentally.
They put that forward as the theory as to why it collapsed. Now, when you look at the collapse of column 79, you can look at that and go, oh, yeah, that would make sense.
Clutching at straws.
But in advance, to say, well, some notes on World Trade Center 7, because I'm like that, you know that.
Go for it.
And I'll say, Building 7's collapse wasn't mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report, and it took the federal government 7 years to conduct an investigation and issue a report for Building 7. 7 years.
Yeah.
Okay. More than 1,700 architects and engineers have signed a petition calling for a new investigation that would include a full inquiry into the apparent use of explosives in the collapse of Building 7, similar to those used in controlled demolitions. Numerous witnesses say the apparent demolition of Building 7 was widely discussed by emergency personnel. We know about that, later advocated by Larry Silver. The pull it thing, we all know about that.
We made the decision to pull Building 7, a known demolition term.
Yeah, witness reports, story's bullshit, though, to be honest. Didn't happen.
Witness reports show that officials who controlled the streets around World Trade Center 7 evacuated the area in the hour before the 5:20 collapse.
Just a second.
Why did they evacuate?
Because I'm just going to argue with Damian for a second. He said it, but he said it to the fire chief. The fire chief afterwards came back and said, "No, he didn't. Why would I be talking to the owner of the building while I'm fighting a fire? Why would I take that?" He was
given an interview and he said that we made the decision to pull the building.
Yeah, but the point is, he said he told the fire chief. The fire chief then turned around and said it didn't happen.
It's almost like a little slip of a bit of extra knowledge that he's got that the people haven't got, that it was a controlled demolition. Whoops, used the wrong term there. Pull it. That's what I think.
But the story he comes out with is not true. That he says, we decided to pull the building because what he's basically saying was we decided to pull that. What actually happened was the official version. They were fighting the fires. They realized the building was going to collapse. Apparently, there's witnesses that say they saw the building swaying and also and they knew it was going to collapse and it was leaning quite dramatically. So they decided to pull the firemen out and let it just burn. That's what I mean by when they said, when you see firemen leaving the building going, just get out of there, it's going to collapse. And then about 10 or 15 minutes later, it did. So you could just argue that's maybe what he meant. But my point is the story about him talking to a fire chief and saying, and they'd asked his permission, isn't true. He was talking shit.
Sorry, maybe he was. Very strange phrase to still be talking shit about on a cameraed interview that you can access. And I
think he just wanted to feel more important than he was.
Perhaps, maybe a little bit. Although he should feel quite important with the billions he made now. But anyway.
It did take a very long time for that building to collapse. You're right, Fac. Very long time. Just long enough to go in and shred a bunch of computers, I think. And
the other thing that that is obviously leading into is why Building 7? Well, second biggest CIA headquarters outside of Langley, Virginia. That'd be the first reason. Good centre operations for the day for the CIA. Good to then demolish your centre operations at the end of the day once you've finished the operation. Get rid of any evidence of that operation being run from that building that day. Also, WTC-7 was the backup for the account section of the Pentagon, which was also destroyed on September the 11th, 2001, which had the only records of the Department of Defence's 2.5 trillion missing in the budget. WTT-7 had the only backup. So there's two pretty good reasons why you take Building 7 out.
It was the Emergency Control Center for New York.
Yep. So the
Reinforced
response is
thing, so but it pretty much destroyed their ability to respond. There was also an investigation into Exxon Oil.
Well, they were also had an officers in there that were George W. Bush's brother Marvin, and his cousin. Is it Wirt Walker? Principals in a company called Stratosec.
Yeah,
which used to be Securicom. I was in charge of security for the World Trade Center.
They did a great job.
And didn't they employed somebody who was the world's foremost expert on Osama bin Laden and hired him as the head of security for the Twin Towers
He was used to work for the CIA.
Weeks or months before the attack happened, and basically put him in one of the buildings that was hit and killed him off as the world's expert of Osama bin Laden. There was also a meeting for a load of whistleblowers that were looking to give evidence. And they'd arranged a meeting on like the 89th floor for, was it 8:30 or 9 o'clock on September the 11th, 2001?
The head of that meeting was late.
Yeah, and survived because he got stuck in traffic.
Yeah,
you know, the actual comments he made, Silverstein, by the way, Damo, was this is the transcript of what he said. Was I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such a terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is to pull it. And they made the decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse, is allegedly what he actually said.
Yeah.
I've seen him say that on video with him actually.
Yes, no, I've seen it as well. I'm just saying it didn't happen. But according to the fire chief, it didn't happen. According to the person he was allegedly talking to, it didn't happen. And like I said, he said, why on earth would I make that phone call in that situation? It's got nothing to do with him, what we do and what my firemen do.
Yeah.
Did Silverstein have a lease on Building 7 as well?
Yeah.
Say that again, sorry?
Did Silverstein have the lease on Building 7?
Yes.
Did he have the whole
He had 4 buildings. Larry Silverstein was actually
buildings,
supposed to be in his office that morning, and he didn't go in. He felt sick. He had a poorly day.
Well, there's a lot of rhetoric online about certain particular groups of people that managed to avoid that day and not turn up for work at the Twin Towers.
Definitely. There's also an investigation into Exxon Oil, which was one of the largest internal and fraud investigations in history. That they'd been doing a lot of very dodgy dealings, undercutting other businesses and environmental breaches and all that sort of thing. And that investigation was headquartered at Building 7. All of the evidence was destroyed.
Do you also know that the thermal imaging of the temperature above the collapse just due to fire, residual fire, not fire in its own right, not an explosion, not a plane hitting it, not jet
just small fires, small office fires.
Office fires that destroyed the structural integrity of World Trade Center 7 and dropped it for a week after 1,500 degrees.
Thermite burns about 1,500 degrees. Just throwing that out there.
Just saying, 1,500 degrees from office fires.
Doesn't it produce aluminium as one of the products when it does cut through structural steel as well, which could explain the pooled metal and the burning for a long period?
There's also
pooled metal.
There's also something else. Oh, you're reminding me of something there, and I'm going to forget what it was. There's a type of steel that they found loads of it pooled. I'm going to forget what it was. You'll have to go back to the video we did on it. I'll have to dig the video we did on it. But there was loads of, and they said one of the effects of thermite burning is you actually create this type of steel, and they found pools of it. But they've actually said, oh, maybe that goes back to the argument. The official version of the argument was, in parts of the building there were cheap. That was cheap steel, and that's probably led to the collapse. The other argument is they didn't use cheap steel, and there was thermite involved. So
I mean, there's New Yorkers that have taken air samples, haven't they? And like samples of the dust on the day, and they've had them analysed, and it shows nanothermite in the dust from the day. So it's just whether you believe that they've not contaminated those samples or not, and that's where the thing lies.
There's a lot of argument about the science of that, to be honest, and contaminated sources and all sorts of things. There's never any scientifically accurate samples that have found nanothermite, but it's the official. That's the official report. They wouldn't. They're basically if you believe that it's an inside job, they're investigating themselves. So of course they're not going to find any evidence in the official evidence.
The 9/11 Commission report, they initially put Henry Kissinger in charge of it, who is a known cover-up mastermind. And then all the families of all the victims started harassing him so much that they had to take him off of it.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting to note as well that World Trade Center 7, the 23rd floor, was the emergency command center for the city of New York, where Rudolph Giuliani should have been. That is where he should have been during the crisis for his city as the mayor of New York. But he was actually at 75 Barclay Street. He's in a makeshift street level headquarters. From the beginning, right from the outset, well before the World Trade Centers come down, well before the fires probably. Well before the fires in WTC 7. So he didn't go to his office, even though the towers hadn't come down yet, and Building 7 wasn't on fire yet. But he still didn't go to his office, the command center for emergencies. He went out of the way at street level. I'm just saying what happened.
He's a complete scumbag, and I'm pretty sure he's a vampire. From what I've seen, I've seen in videos, mate, and I think he's the undead. I'm just saying.
How far do you go? I mean, the companies that you need to investigate, the list is endless. I personally, there's one concise video that I think on YouTube by a alien scientist where he condensed it into about 40 minutes, and the sheer volume of coincidence within who owns these various companies and what they're up to. I mean, you need to look at the bushes. The insurance companies within the Twin Towers. You've got Cantor Fitzgerald, Euro Brokers, and one other. One of the impacts into one of the towers was pretty much into the secure servers of Cantor Fitzgerald, and I think the other one was into Euro Brokers. There were $240 billion of securities that were due on September the 10th, 2001. Now, normally these would have to go through checking procedures. However, on September the 11th, 2001, due to the destruction of those three insurance brokers, they declared a state of emergency. FEMA did, and enacted their emergency powers. So the normal regulatory procedures and the checking of that $240 billion worth of securities from the fall of the Soviet Union and the Russian ruble scam wouldn't be investigated and were cleared without the normal regulatory procedures. The whole of the events of September the 11th were a complete distraction from what was actually going on with money.
I would actually say that there is a theory that America ended the Cold War with this huge ruble scam, like you said, or they made a lot of money from the collapse of the Soviet Union, and a lot of laws were broken, and we'll never know about them because September 11, at least in part. I mean, we'll talk about why we think September 11 happened later, and I think it's lots of little pieces to a puzzle. I think one of those pieces might be to cover up previous crimes. And if it's true, it works really well. So the missing trillions. You mentioned it earlier, Damian, and I slapped you down for it, and rightfully so, because you shouldn't have said it. So, but the missing trillions is what we're talking about here, isn't it? And we're going to go into the Pentagon.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes. Is that what you were trying to do? I was about to. I was building up to it,
yeah.
I was building the suspense.
Yeah. Henry, you've done a great job of it. I just weren't reading the signals correctly.
We said we weren't going to take the piss in this video too much. But yeah, so the Pentagon attack went straight into a plane or missile, we'll talk about that in a minute, went straight into the one section of the Pentagon that was where the accounts department basically was. The meme that we always see on Facebook is that the day before September 11th, Donald Rumsfeld announced that they were missing trillions of dollars from the Department of Defense budget.
He didn't announce it for the first time. He restated it.
Yeah.
I told you that.
Yeah. Either way, it's still very coincidental that he talks about it the day before.
Talking about the day before. Again, a lot of conspiracy theorists say that money has never been found. And it's kind of true. And that this attack was designed, again, to destroy the evidence of where all this money going into Black Ops or wherever else, secret space program maybe. We've done an episode on that as well. Where all this money was basically embezzled to or went missing. It's also important to say that the section that the aircraft went into, was actually one of the small, had been going a massive refurbishment in the run-up to the attack. And it was virtually empty except for this department that was looking into this missing trillions. If we talk about that first, what do you think about this theory that this attack was very orchestrated to just break up and destroy this evidence of this massive cock-up in the DoD budget? Damian, you go first.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I don't even we're not even considering what it was, whether it was a plane that hit the Pentagon or not, but whatever it was that hit it. You're destroying the account section of the Pentagon where you've got a massive black hole in your budget, in your operational budget, that you can't account for. It just seems again too coincidental. And then to destroy the backup at WTC 7. Come on. Come on. It seems like orchestrated events to try and cover up past events well into the future, as well as also create bogeymen in order for the military industrial complex to continue manufacturing weapons and ammunition and making money for it, whilst we keep invading and occupying and killing people in other countries that we blame for it.
We always need a bad guy. How about you, Dave?
It stinks. It stinks big. I mean, you both pretty much covered it, really, haven't you? I mean, it's there was a lot that didn't add up. There was a lot of like I don't want to branch too much into other topics, but certain research and development within other areas that the military industrial complex do in the US. It's going into places that they're not being held accountable for, that is hidden from the general public. And they want complete deniability over any of it. It's hard to do that when there's a paper trail. It's hard to do that when there's evidence. It's hard to do that when there is receipts, when there's documents, when there's offices even in place. It's hard to do that when there's people in place that might get in the way of what you want to do. The knock-on effect of that is, for many years afterwards, it's for decades afterwards, I would imagine. But, if we were talking about some loose change, even at a government level, some loose change, then, you can sort of understand that finances can be not quite strictly controlled. But we're talking about a hell of a chunk of money, aren't we? A hell of a chunk. What is it? How much exactly was it?
22 trillion.
22 trillion. 22
that's
trillion.
what it stands at now. It stands at now 22 trillion.
Now, is that their national debt? Sorry.
It's about equivalent to their national debt.
Yeah.
So what's missing is now equivalent to their national debt.
Yeah.
Basically, the Department of Defense many years ago decided not to write down anything. They just did it in their head. They did the math in their head. We'll buy a load of F-22 Raptors. Should we write down the cost? Nah. We're fine. Don't worry about it. This was a problem that built it. It was actually announced, and the scandal started 6 months before 9/11, and it's been going on ever since. A lot of the conspiracy theorists still say, we're conspiracy theorists to be fair, but a lot of people come and say, well, they never found the money. And it is actually true. About 18 months after 9/11, they continued, because all the evidence wasn't destroyed. Of course it wasn't. I mean, the Pentagon and DoD is in lots of different places.
Area 51. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, the people that have been developing all of the.
What did they just say about the black projects and?
Exactly, this information was everywhere. So they continue the research anyway.
Sorry.
Yeah, they look into this lost trillions did continue, and about I think it was about 2011 they announced we found it, we know where it is, we figured it out. A year after that, they went, oh no, we made a mistake, we haven't. There's actually lots more missing than we haven't, and the numbers, it's just steadily gone up ever since, and they still haven't seemed to have figured out the basic principle of writing shit down. They just don't seem to have bothered. And 9/11 attacks did hamper the investigation. We will never quite know what was lost, to be honest, or what evidence was lost. Again, maybe this was another piece of the puzzle.
There was a company called the El Dorado Task Force that was investigating the those securities that I mentioned earlier, the $240 billion worth, and the entire chain of command of that El Dorado Task Force was they were in one of the WTC 1 or 2, I think, not 7, but they were their entire chain of command was taken out, and I think that was the one that were arranged to have the meeting on the 89th floor at 8:30, 9 o'clock in WTC 1 on September 11th. I couldn't remember that earlier, so I thought I'd just mention it.
Thank you, Damian.
Yeah. Right, so the big question then. Missile or plane? I'm going to start off by just making the point that I always try to make with these things. If you're planning a terror attack, you want to keep it as simple as possible. You want as few moving parts and you want as few witnesses. I think ideally, the planners, if this was planned and orchestrated and it was all an inside job, they would want to fly a plane into the Pentagon. They would want to do the damage with the actual aircraft. And this goes to my argument and say why I don't believe that there was anything else going on with the Twin Towers. Some people have said that holograms and all sorts of theories about the planes. The second plane looked weird and all sorts of things. I don't think you do. I think the simple explanation is fly a plane into the building. Maybe set some bombs off and make sure it collapses, but keep it simple. The simpler the better.
The Pentagon comptroller was a very interesting guy, wasn't he? He was sworn in May 2001, not several months before September the 11th obviously occurred. Prior to him being sworn in as the Pentagon comptroller, I think in charge of the accounts section that was leveled on 9/11, he was the director of a company called System Plannings Corporation International Limited that dealt with the remote control flight of passenger and other aircraft, and the termination of those aircraft if they fail on the remote.
Yeah, as a fail safe, so they wouldn't go awry. Yeah, they wouldn't go rogue. They could destroy them. Yeah.
And you can see what they think might have been data pods on some of the aircraft and some of the photos, can't they? Or antenna pods that maybe see. And I actually think that's completely logical, even for the Twin Towers aircraft. Why trust people when you could program? There might not even be terrorists on that aircraft. If that plane was rigged, there could have been pilots, because these are all these aircraft are fly by wire. What you do with that yoke makes no difference.
They could have been unmanned aircraft, in my opinion.
Well, I think they could have been full of the passengers. Again, I don't think you murder those people on those aircraft. You don't have an empty plane. You have a plane full of the people that should have been on the plane, because these people don't care about 50, 60 lives. And that's the other thing you should remember is these planes are barely a third full. 50 or 60 on each plane. You rig the plane so it takes off and just flies into the building. Boom. And the pilots could have been on that bridge going crazy, trying to control the aircraft, trying to do something, and the aircraft's flying itself. And that is well within the case. These aircraft do actually basically take off and land themselves. The pilot doesn't really do anything. It just, it just press a button. There's so much automation on modern aircraft, modern airliners, even back in 2001. But that goes into the Pentagon. I have a pal who has flown military aircraft and aviation, civilian aviation, and I asked him straight, "Do you believe the Pentagon?" He says, "Look, flying those planes into the Twin Towers, easy. It's not hard to do. And even somebody with basic knowledge could do it. And we haven't even mentioned the terrorists, but even somebody with basic knowledge could do it. flying the plane into the Pentagon is almost impossible. There are several safety systems aboard those aircraft that would be forcibly trying to stop you from doing it, because you're flying the aircraft at 400 miles an hour towards the ground. The plane does not want you to do it. So you'd have to have somebody that can disable those systems. You also have
the maneuver.
So I'm going to rant on this because it really winds me up.
It was a 270-degree corkscrew.
Incredibly maneuver.
Incredible maneuver for a human to perform. For autopilot to perform, possible.
Easy, actually reasonably easy
than a human.
But again,
because the Pentagon's very low to the ground, so you've got to be flying in very low to hit the Pentagon. It's not.
Well, there's an effect called air cushion, basically, that when a large aircraft comes in like that, it's compressing the air underneath it as it comes down. At those speeds, it would be very difficult to compensate for that. So he says he's almost certain that if that aircraft it'd either nosedive into the ground short, or it would bounce and end up going over and missing. He says the chances of a pilot with limited experience, and they all did have limited experience, not as limited experience as some people let you believe. These guys did have experience on larger twin-engine jets. Mm-hmm. Not much, but some. He says as a pilot, he doesn't think he could do it, and he had 30 years of experience. So in that case, there's two possibilities for me. Mm-hmm. They knew they couldn't do it, so they hit it with a missile. And some eyewitnesses says they saw. Some people thought it was a small plane. Cruise missiles looks like small planes. Mm-hmm. Or they did it, but it was automated. In which case, it wasn't the terrorists. There must have been a plan. There must have been a thing in place.
12-ton Rolls-Royce engines.
Well, no engines. The hole is that thing about the hole being too small, though, mate. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that. This is a reinforced concrete building.
12-ton Rolls-Royce engines to nothing, do you?
They just melted.
Two 12-ton engine blocks there. Like,
but I think
you'd see the remnants of them.
Right. But I actually think either possibility basically proves the theory that this was an inside job. Discuss. So, I'm done ranting. Go on, Dave. You're obviously thinking. I can see your brain ticking.
I'm just there's a lot of things about the Pentagon. A lot of people that were on the freeway at the time said that they saw a plane coming over and hit the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. There were many eyewitnesses or alleged eyewitnesses that said they saw the Pentagon get hit.
I've never seen anyone say that they thought it hit the Pentagon. I've seen some saying it flew over. Because there's a main road that goes just the north of it.
Yeah. Plenty saying that they've seen it hit. I was going to say there's people who've seen it say they saw it fly over. But also people who said that they saw it look like it got hit by a missile. Mm-hmm. So you've got a mix of reports coming in from various so-called witnesses. Yeah. You mix that up with the CCTV. This is the Pentagon, right? Okay, just think about it for a sec, everybody. It's the Pentagon, okay? It isn't just like a McDonald's in the middle of somewhere. It's the Pentagon, okay? Yeah. It's the CCTV cameras all over the place, and in all areas around it.
But the footage is abysmal.
All over the place there is CCTV, and the FBI wanted that footage. The FBI took that footage. There's reports of them muscling in and taking CCTV footage and stuff. The telegraph poles are the street lights.
Yeah.
For something that's flying so close to what would be practically a parallel horizontal plane, if you excuse the terminology, to the ground to hit it like it did. And, most commercial airline pilots, I would posit, would argue that is a very, very difficult, if not impossible, maneuver. It doesn't really fall into the remit of what they are trained to do when there's any kind of catastrophic systems failure aboard an aircraft. They don't learn how to control slamming into a building parallel to the floor at 500 miles an hour. Engines failing, that kind of thing. Cutouts, loss in communications. But
a 270-degree corkscrew is just not a maneuver you're trained in, is it? To be honest, when do you use it?
And these people, the terrorists responsible for it, can pull off that maneuver. Now, I would say that even if they were trained up to the same standard as the commercial airline pilots, which is not, they weren't. They did have, like you say, more experience than people say. Agreed. But they wouldn't have been trained. They wouldn't have had the same amount of flight hours in a commercial aircraft as a commercial airline pilot. So the chances that they learned how to do those maneuvers and airline pilots didn't is completely implausible, isn't it? Yet they pulled it off first time. It'd have to be the first time because you couldn't get it wrong, could you? You'd only get one go at it. So I don't know. You know, the debris, looking at the debris on the lawn and the lack of certain other aspects of debris, the way the building is burnt on the inside. I agree with you about the hole in the side of the building as well, though. You know, not being sizable enough. I don't know about that. And things being destroyed. There's been too many aircraft crashes, passenger airline crashes over the years. And if you want a gory night's research, people, you can go online and look at photographs that have been taken at these crash sites that have plummeted from 30,000 feet in some instances. And they haven't completely dissolved. You know, there's still a fair amount of wreckage. There's still large chunks of the fuselage, nose cones, tail fins, engines, stuff like that, wheels, you know, the seats. Unfortunately, most of the time with bodies still strapped inside them, unfortunately.
I want to look into the companies that got the renovation contracts at the Pentagon afterwards, and also
Bush family
rebuilt
businesses
Ground Zero. Yeah, Bond Levis, Amis. There's a couple of one of them got. I think one of them took care of one of the towers' wreckage. The other took care of the other. Yeah, there's some very interesting companies to look into, and there are a lot of them.
Raytheon did very well out of all of this.
So did, what was it? American Insurance Group, the insurance company. When all the other insurance companies were posting massive losses, AIG didn't suffer those same losses. Coincidentally, they had a link, didn't they, between Silverstream, a bit of software that was to streamline the interactions between AIG, the American Insurance Group, and I'm going to say, was it Euro Brokers, where the dad, Maurice somebody, was the CEO of of AIG, and the son is the CEO of the other company. This Silverstream software they created was what they think they created to bill for fictitious hardware that didn't exist to the tune of billions or tune of millions or whatever. And there were huge spikes in hard drive activity from the hard drives that were recovered from the Twin Tower wreckage that they managed to analyze the magnetic discs, and they saw huge spikes in money being moved in the early hours of the morning up to the events of September the 11th.
Yeah.
So again, follow the money
before the impact.
Well, we got the follow the money now, but we'll adjust this slightly and sort of say, why do we actually think September 11 happened? Well, the first question: do you think September 11 was an inside job, or was it? Is the official story pretty much accurate? And if it's not, what degree? Because I think there are levels of if there was governmental parts of the government involvement, there are levels, sort of thing. Damian, what do you think? I mean, you can say it's a simple yes or no, but then I'd want a bit more.
No. I suppose I'd like to submit it. I think September the 11th was a event that was at the very least known by the American government, and therefore they were complicit through negligence, and they allowed it to happen because it served their interests, or they were involved, possibly with the use of the Israeli Mossad posing as Arabs in order to invade and occupy the Middle East in order to control their natural resources and create turmoil in those regions for years to come. I mean, we can see what's happening with Afghanistan now, can't we, with the rhetoric coming out now about how human rights again, and how that's all come back again now that we've left, and it's 20 years wasted. But was it, or was it just 20 years of profiteering from the companies that manufacture the ammunition and weapons?
Yeah. How about you, Dave?
Whenever I think of 9/11, I sort of think of a comment made by a US Navy SEAL called Ed O'Neill, I believe, who was who's the Navy SEAL responsible for shooting Osama bin Laden. And I remember him saying that one of the things that influenced his decision to want to join the military and for how he felt about going on that particular mission into the compound in Pakistan was seeing the image of a woman falling out the World Trade Center, whose last act of decency and humanity was to hold her skirt down as she was falling to her death so that she could hide her underwear. And the graphic pictures that we were seeing on 9/11 have left an imprint in everybody's minds, in everybody's psyche that were witness to it. Whether you was, experiencing what was going on vicariously through the TV, or whether you were there in reality, it's had an effect upon society that we're going to feel for many, many generations. It's easy to speculate. It's even easier to ruminate. But taking from it the official line, it's nice to think that it justifies everything that's happened since. It's when you look back at it that you realize that justification, or the reasons for that justification, are very, very questionable.
Well, look at the countries now, Iraq and Afghanistan. Just look where they are today, for 20 years on from 2001, when 17 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian, weren't they?
There was another act who were actually. I've got some. I'll do them a little bit later on. Like facts about 9/11, and you can stop me if you think they're boring later. But they're just some interesting facts that are relevant and pertinent to what went on because of the 9/11. And the stream is remembering 9/11, not let's concentrate on the dodgy people who might have instigated. So we just want to try and balance it a little bit by going after the human side of it. I mean, 3,000 people lost their lives, and the biggest loss of life was obviously US citizens, but after that it were people from the UK. So we just as much right as there's anybody around the world really to feel that answers or the complete transparency is owed to the public, and we've just as much right to that as UK citizens as anybody else is.
Well, the victims' families never got any answers, did they? Really? In America,
I struggle with the official narrative for a lot of reasons, and this stream tonight. I know this is a bit of a convoluted way of answering you, Jay, but this short stream we do tonight, it isn't remotely enough to cover it.
No, God no. The thing I always think about this is I do not want to think that any government or any department within a government could behave in a way that would cause the loss of life on this sort of scale. I also always think about how we always talk about the 3,000 people that died on the day. Within a few months of the Iraq invasion, 100,000 Iraqi civilians died. Those are innocent people.
Well, think bigger. Think the 50 countries America's invaded and occupied since World War II. That's countless millions.
Yeah. So we talk about the 3,000, but we should also talk about what happened after and the fallout. But there's a lot of people that made a lot of money following the 9/11 attack. There's a lot of people that, as sick as it sounds, were quite happy or quite grateful in a way that it happened because it solved a lot of problems. Companies like Raytheon and other parts of the industrial military complex that are very powerful within the United States did very, very well and are still doing very, very well following the 9/11 attack. And whether that means, I think it's a back to front way of thinking of things, put the cart before the horse a little bit. But you can't say that there aren't a lot of people that weren't, I don't want to use the word happy it happened, but benefited from what happened. And when I start thinking about what people are capable of doing when they know there are billions involved, people are really capable of some sick shit. And we know at the end of the day that the CIA knew almost every element of this plan. We know they did. One of the big arguments since is that the CIA is too big, that and the FBI and the CIA weren't talking to each other. There was a big feud between them. So between them, they had the whole picture, but they weren't talking to each other. They were in
Too much
competition with each other.
compartmentalization of information.
Yeah. Well, it's even more childish than that, mate. They were in competition with each other. They didn't want the other one to sort of scoop them or to, and there was a lot of fucking like drawing lines going on. The FBI going, well, this is our territory. We do this. That's not your job. And the CIA going, oh, well, it's international. It's our job. And just bullshit that could have very easily stopped this. So I asked the question of what if I think there was an inside job, and I think there was government involvement. I think at very least they let it happen. I think there must have been people at some point that knew this was a threat.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember
and almost allowed it to happen?
Able Danger terrorist tracking program that identified Mohammed Atta as the ringleader. I think a full year and something prior. They reckon they destroyed 7 terabytes of data relating to when the presidency, or should it wasn't the presidency? What's the way to phrase it? The administration decided to shut down Able Danger. The lead guy from that's a strong whistleblower, isn't he?
To be fair to the Able Danger, they didn't decide to shut it down. They had to shut it down because they realised it was massively illegal. The Able Danger was set up.
What they've been doing since, the same exact thing.
It's legal now.
They just legalised.
We could talk about. It's legal now, though, mate, because of something else that happened after 9/11, the Patriot Act. Legalized many things, and we've got our own version of the Patriot Act, or our law system doesn't really work like that. We've got lots of little laws that basically make up the same thing. Is one big fallout from 9/11 that our freedoms and our privacy has been eroded to a point where we don't really have any?
Yep.
That is one side effect, I think, of 9/11 that we don't necessarily think about. We think about the Afghan war and the Iraq war, and that's very real at the moment. That we're trying to pull out of Afghanistan, and basically it's like we never went in. We may as well have not bothered. We've left it. We've spent billions, and it's exactly the same position as we went in.
Probably a lot worse, you could argue.
Well, no, we've actually made it much worse. Yeah.
But I mean, it is. It's a very interesting one, Jamie. I mean, I think it kind of links into. I forgot where I was going to go there. Sorry, what were you just saying? Sorry, I've just lost the plot then for a second.
Just that Afghanistan's much worse than when we went in. We'd made no money out of it. We never even let the bloody Afghans grow opium so that they could sell it to us for medicine. We didn't even let them do that. So I mean, we tried to give them women's rights, and now they're just you're not driving again, and you will wear full books and things. It's going to be much worse than ever before we went in, and we knew this was going to happen. The Russians invaded Afghanistan. We funded and made Osama bin Laden a very wealthy man, and made him the CIA's bitch, by the way.
He was trained he was part of the Mujahideen that were trained, wasn't he, to fight off of the Russians? There's even rumours, isn't there, online that he was some kind of CIA double agent.
He had strong links to the CIA. The whole family does. The whole family has strong links to the CIA.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And the Bush family.
What was it? The Carlyle Oil Group, the Bush and the Bin Ladens.
Yeah. Well, Bush was head of the CIA during the Mujahideen incident. He had lots of, in fact, he had lots of meetings with Osama bin Laden, with the family. They personally knew each other. It's like that. That's just crazy. So to answer my own question,
too many.
Yes, I think it was an inside job. I think it was a red flag. A red flag. That's not right, is it?
Black flag.
It's a false flag operation, and I think the Americans have done it repeatedly. That history is full of times when and anybody says to me that my government wouldn't do that. You need to learn your history, because they faked an attack on an American military naval vessel, so that they can invade Vietnam. I always forget if it's Vietnam or Korea. I always get those two mixed up.
The Gulf of Tonkin.
The Gulf of Tonkin.
There was the Gulf of Tonkin incident, wasn't there? And there was also the sinking of the Lusitania. That was a bit.
No, the use of Lusitania was much earlier. Yeah.
World War I, sorry. But I mean, that incident isn't, and the Gulf of Tonkin incident isn't a conspiracy theory. It's history. And that incident pulled America into a conflict because they wanted to, that cost millions of lives.
There's the documents released from the Cuban Missile Crisis that they were thinking of doing the exact same to Cuba,
Operation
flying
Northwood.
passenger jets into American landmarks and in order to invade and occupy Cuba, which is, and then you also
Operation
combine that with the
Northwood.
fact, and then they were running
Operation Northwood.
terrorist drills on the day of the exact thing, and then Bush comes on the telly and says in one of his speeches, "Oh, we couldn't envisage they were going to fly planes into buildings." Yes, you could. You come up with it 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, back then it was 40 years ago. Now
Fly
it's
it into a nuclear reactor was one of the theories.
it just,
Take a passenger plane and fly it into a nuclear reactor. That
but
was
Bush
one
is
of
an
the things
idiot,
they're going to do.
and he does let a few things slip. I mean, have you seen that speech where he goes on about weapons of mass destruction, and he's just like to a room full of like his peers and what's the word, rich people, the aristocracy, and he's going, "No, they've got to have those weapons of mass destruction somewhere." He's making a joke out of it. It's unreal. Like they know they can get away with it and be as blatant as they want, and they're not going to get prosecuted for it because the Official Secrets Act covers them.
Yeah, and Dave, you mentioned earlier as well that we need to remember the 3,000 that died, and a lot of those were British. So this is as relevant to us in some ways as the Americans. You've also got to remember how many soldiers have we lost in the Iraq conflict, in the Afghan conflict. Both of these conflicts were triggered by 9/11 directly. Afghan was a revenge attack. Iraq was a power play, in my opinion. We've lost hundreds of soldiers, and hundreds, maybe even thousands more are injured and disabled for the rest of their lives. We were dragged into both those conflicts, particularly Iraq, completely illegally. We were being told they could hit us within 45 minutes with their Russian missiles that barely worked and like built out of washing machine parts, and all these things.
With WMDs.
Yeah, WMDs. We were completely dragged into that conflict illegally. On a wave of sympathy for America following this attack. America got away with a great deal following 9/11 that we're still paying for. And our government, our country paid for it almost as not as much as America, but almost, in some ways, almost as much as America did. How many soldiers have we lost in Afghanistan? It's hundreds, and that's something we need to,
I remembered where I was going to go a minute ago with that thought, and it was just down the war on terror. I bet you the guy at the at one of the military industrial complex, one of the corporations that came up with the war on terror, brilliant, never ending war. What's a war on terror? It's a war on the consequences of the actions you're involved in. When does it end? Never. So will people keep giving away their freedoms for the false idea of a bit more security? Yeah, let's see what we can take. Come on. So now the Patriot Act's in America, or the one that's similar in the UK is in. If your government decides you're a terrorist, they can legally detain you for 30 days without trial, without being charged, just because they call you a name. That's a lot of power, that is.
It's a tag. Yeah, they basically tag you with the thing terrorist. The stuff the Americans were getting up to, like just taking people off the street all over the world and then turning them through the UK, completely illegal. We have several laws against using enhanced interrogation techniques, but we were using it. But we got around it. We allowed the Americans to use it, because again, there was this sympathy. There was this. It was almost like people were scared to get in their way. Right? America's going to react. They're going to do this, and we're either with them or against them. So we better be with them. Except for France, who refused, and the media turned on them viciously. So I don't know.
It's even orchestrated at a world level. That's how much power the American government and the American media seems to be able to the way that France was shunned in that way for sort of standing up and going, well, actually, we don't really think you've got a lot of evidence for who this is that's done this yet. I think Family Guy sums it up well with that quote that it does. That one where it goes, where Peter's going on about Ground Zero. Oh, this is where the first guy got AIDS. No, Peter. This is the site of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Oh, right. Saddam Hussein did this? No. The Iraq army? No. Some guys from Iraq? No. That one lady that visited Iraq that one time? No, Peter, Iraq had nothing to do with this. It was a bunch of Saudi Arabians, Lebanese and Egyptians financed by a Saudi Arabian guy living in Afghanistan and sheltered by Pakistanis. So we need to invade Iran?
Yeah.
And I think that just sums up the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan perfectly. It was nothing to do with the terrorist attacks. It was to do with oil in Iraq, and it was to do with heroin in Afghanistan. Follow the money.
Yeah, I never really believed the heroin thing, but I do believe that I always felt Afghanistan was a revenge attack.
90%
They just went to invade somebody
from Afghanistan. It's worth 400 billion a year. I think.
I know, but
that pie.
Yeah, you're making
Heroin
money.
addictions up all over Europe and North America as well since the invasion of Afghanistan.
Yeah, went up 1,000% in the first year of US occupation.
As is marijuana.
Yeah.
Massive crops of weed are also grown in Afghanistan. In fact, many farmers over there, that's their source of income.
That's one of the things we did when we went in is try to make them grow other things, and they went, nothing else grows here. Have you seen Afghanistan? Nothing grows. We're not growing barley. It doesn't grow. We've got no water.
Alexander the Great failed to conquer Afghanistan when he had an empire stretching across Europe, the Middle East, North Africa. Yeah, and he still didn't have Afghanistan. So
everybody,
we knew, the Americans knew when we were invading Afghanistan, it was for the long haul and it was never going to go anywhere. The top generals knew this without a shadow of a doubt. They've studied history and they knew this. It's unwinnable war in mountainous terrain. It's just
tanks don't work. Tanks are rubbish. Aircraft are rubbish. Helicopters are rubbish, and that sort of thing. All you can do is boots on ground. It's an incredibly difficult place to fight.
You also want to look at what politicians have, what shares in what companies that go in and rebuild these countries after America's been in and flattened all of their infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
It's mostly politicians that make mint out of it.
You build them twice. That's the beautiful thing about it. You get to screw them both ways. We go in, destroy everything. All the industrial military complex make a fortune because every missile costs $70 million. And then another company goes in and rebuilds it and makes a fortune.
Yep.
The only better way of doing it is to make sure that the conflict continues and they continue fighting and just do just enough damage so that you can continue repairing it.
Yeah, on a continual basis. Yeah.
Money. Which is really weird that they've now left. Is there anything we've missed before we wrap this up? I think we've done quite well, to be honest.
We've done it right in 2 hours. I think we covered quite a wide range. I'm trying to think if there's anything we've missed. Anything major.
How about you, Dave? Because you've got mountains of notes there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of them, isn't it? It's the best laid plans of mice and men Afghanaglay, as they say. Yeah. But I did put like a couple of facts down. I thought I did. 1 second, I'll ream a few out. Okay, so yeah, the week after 9/11, alcohol consumption in Manhattan increased by 25%, tobacco intake rose by 10%, and church attendance rose by 20%. After the attacks, it took firefighters 100 days to extinguish all the fires around Ground Zero. So we know about the property things. We won't go into that. When the National Guard went after Flight 93, the two pilots who took to the air didn't have time to properly arm their jets. And the pilots knew that if they did intercept the hijacked plane, they would have to fly their jets into the aircraft rather than shoot it down, apparently, with no guarantee that they could eject in time. So in other words, they were pretty much on a suicide mission. More than 1,100 people who worked or lived near the World Trade Centers during 9/11 have been diagnosed with cancer due to exposure to toxins from the site, so asbestos, smoke from jet fuel, and other carcinogens. The employee who gave the order to ground all planes after the attacks was a guy called Ben Sliney. Pronunciation could be Sleeny, and it was his first day on the job. On a normal day. What a first day. On a normal day at the Twin Towers, it usually contained up to 50,000 employees working within the buildings and an extra 40,000 that passed through. I've only got a few more, so bear with me. Only 18 survivors were pulled from the rubble after the collapse of the towers. The ages of the victims range from 2 to 85 years old in all of the 9/11 attacks, and about 75 to 80% of the victims were men. As of August 2017, only 60% of the World Trade Center victims' remains have been positively identified, which at that time was leaving 1,113 of the 2,753 who have no biological confirmation of death. Just five more. Sorry, the Islamic terrorist group Al Qaeda had initially conspired about attacking a nuclear power plant, as you said, on 9/11, but they then decided to ditch the plant allegedly, for they thought that things might get out of control. A month before it happened, George Bush received a memo which stated that bin Laden would be targeting New York City and hijacking planes. And this report was titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the US." Okay, just four more. The alleged 19 hijackers of the attack, including Mohammed Atta being the leader, were never even identified in the investigations that followed the events of 9/11. And according to some reports that are in mainstream media, at least 7 FBI named perpetrators are still alive and free. So 7 of the so-called 19 are alive.
That. Yeah, no, there's brilliant. There's a couple of guys there's one guy, isn't there, that's at university in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, 7 of them.
Picture, but like, it wasn't me.
7 of them are still alive, allegedly. In fact, the guy who played RoboCop, James Wood, reported 4 suspicious individuals in his flight in August in 2011, but the authorities didn't act on it. And those that he suspected later were identified to be some of the 9/11 hijackers as well. 2 more. After 9 months of the 9/11 attacks, the number of births rose by 20% in New York City. And according to reports, 3,051 children lost a parent in the 9/11 attacks. Well, and this is the one that's the weirdest one. And because it does sound like a bit like a sci-fi kind of script almost. A machine called the Random Event Generator at Princeton University predicted a cataclysmic event that was about to unfold 3 hours before the attacks. So there you go.
That's
creepy.
It's almost like
thinking about these random number generators. Sorry, go on, Damian. Go on, mate.
No, don't you say it. You say it. We were thinking the same wavelength there.
Yeah, I can just hear a lot of the stories about the random number generators being able to be influenced by I think even these quantum, which is being influenced by people, that some numbers come out more than others. And things like that.
Yeah, affect the outcome. It was the Dalai Lama. They asked the Dalai Lama what he thought of the fact of people being able to affect the outcome and was the random number generator therefore conscious, because our conscious mind can affect it. And he says the Dalai Lama's response is only if the person believes the random number generator to be conscious.
I think that's sort of arguing semantics about sentience.
Yeah, but it's just it's a kind of answer that I just thought was brilliant for
most definitely.
A nothing answer back from the Dalai Lama, in the sense that it's in the beholder. But
the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I quite like that. I like that because I do tend to think that the universe is the physical universe, the matter universe is a manifestation of the consciousness within it, group consciousness.
Oh, deep, very deep.
And that ties in quite nicely to that. So I quite like that because of that. Not my belief in that.
Definitely a spooky coincidence. Anyway, if you believe in coincidences. All right, guys. I think we've covered that best we can, and I think it's a nice way to remember.
Yes,
obviously we're Christian channel, so we're going to talk about these things. Yes, sorry, mate.
You did drop out for a sec there. I'll just jump in for 1 sec to sort of like bolster what you were saying there. So thanks everybody for this. We've covered the first part of tonight's show. We've got another 12. Bear with us. If you've got till about 5 o'clock in the morning, then we should be okay. Go on. What was you saying, Jay?
All the other bits that we've forgotten. Yeah,
you froze, Jay. You froze.
Am I not with you?
No, you are now, but immediately when you started to talk, you froze.
Well, yeah, I was just saying that basically, it's such an emotive subject, but it's such one of those events, isn't it, that changed the world. And there's not many events like this in our history that actually sort of changed everything.
No.
In the West, you're thinking World War II, this event. There's not many. And it was just such a that we're still feeling the consequences of it now, particularly with the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the shit show that has become, and the way it's eroded our rights. This was for me. I believe it was probably. I don't believe it was an inside job. I believe it might have been allowed to happen. I believe a lot of people benefited from it. But I say there's an old saying, isn't it, within government: never ever let a good crisis go to waste. And our governments, bare minimum, took full advantage of what happened to push through a bunch of things that, to be honest, like they have done with the recent C word and the P word, they've taken a good crisis and taken advantage of it. And our government,
some of your freedoms for the false idea of a bit more security, and you know,
and that's not a conspiracy theory. That's history.
And it also links into the UFOs as well, doesn't it? That's another reason why they don't come out and disclose us to UFOs, because obviously if they can't protect you from something,
they can't admit it.
No, but you're not going to keep giving away your freedoms for a false idea of security if they can't no longer protect you from everything.
That's why
that whole little bubble exists where we're the military, American military. We can protect all our citizens. We'll protect you. But as soon as they admit the UFO thing, then people start questioning other things as well. I think that's why that's been held for so long without any disclosure. Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was just a little link.
Well, I think ostensibly, what tonight's stream will have been interesting to some extent to some people and thought-provoking to others. And it hasn't been an exercise in trying to downplay the tragedy of the day, should anybody think that if they watch this stream. Because obviously myself, like Jay and Damian, are not belittling the event or trying to churlishly explain it away as being an insignificance because of what we think might have occurred. And because that isn't the case, obviously a lot of people died, and as Jay quite rightly pointed out, a lot of people have subsequently died because of actions taken afterwards. And it's the 3 days, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So we our thoughts are with the people who were affected by it. But also fundamentally, a lot of what we've been talking about tonight is we've all been affected by it. That is the issue. We've all been affected by it. We will continue to be affected by it. And the people that are affected are affecting us and not affected by our thought process, unfortunately. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. If any one person out there thinks that the people who control their laws, the people who allegedly control their constitution, their Bill of Rights, or anything like that even, and are not in a position to do something against the very people that they're in control of, you seriously need to study history. You just need to look back, because history is replete with examples of the ruling classes, whether it be in a regal sense, whether it's in a sovereign sense, whether it's in a governmental sense, controlling the very people that they govern and using them to instigate more levels of power, greed and wealth. So it's about, you look deep, don't just take the main line.
Maybe that's why all civilizations fail in the long run, because as they become bigger and bigger, it's much harder for the corruption to be avoided, and that's why through all of our recorded history, every major civilization has failed. You could probably argue there's some link with that.
I was thinking about that when we first did our first video in our 9/11 series. I got a comment almost immediately going, "My government wouldn't do that." So I completely scrapped our plan, and I put in our first video was looking at the history of false flag operations. So if you think your government wouldn't do that, here is the historical evidence to prove that you're wrong, because our government would do that, because our government don't actually care about you. They care about taxes. They care about culture. They care about.
Do you know what people forget, right? Is you vote for a party. You vote for a rosette, mainly you vote for ideology, but you don't choose the topics that get decided upon when those people are in power. You don't get to decide the actions of the people in power. So thinking that you have control over the people that you put in power is the biggest deception of all. Because if they truly wanted to know what the public felt about every single little thing that they was going to do, they would they would confer against us, or they would get us to vote about it. But we're
just
led
vote
to
on the
believe that
smartphone,
we have
everything.
voted them into power, so we've put them in a position of trust on our behalf. It doesn't work that way.
The other thing is, I would say that individuals are quite clever. People are thick.
Yeah.
Groups of people.
Groupthink.
We're very emotive. An instant, something happens, we react. Mob mentality. That's why we can't have true democracy. We'll never have true democracy because, like Damian said, we've got our smartphones here. We could have a vote every time there was a major decision.
Yeah.
And it'd be really easy to have an app, but it would be chaos.
What the governments of the world have actually realised is they don't want the bottom so many percent doing too much voting, because that's actually what they've. So a lot of the people that are very uninvolved in politics, quite a lot, tend to be from the lower end of society, and that's not what they want. A lot of the people voting a lot of the time anyway. I think That's not. It's a bit sweeping statement, but I think there is a bit to that. It's like South Park, isn't it? Voting between a douche and a giant turd and a douche sandwich. They give you one option who you hate and another option who you hate. They're both pretending to be two different sides of the same coin. One's red, one's blue. They never discuss any of the things that actually matter to anybody, and they just pick little tiny holes with each other's policies on the things that don't matter.
Well, look at. I mentioned it today actually to somebody as well when a brief came up about politics. Is look into horseshoe theory. The two, you have extremists on one side, you have extremists on the other that believe the complete opposite of those do, and somewhere in the middle at the bottom of the horseshoe are the reasonable people that get it. But what you get is both sides start to mirror one another and take on board their policies. You see it with left to right shifts, especially with the two major parties that are in the UK. It happens all the time. It happens in the States. What you do is you people believe they vote in an ideology due to class structure, where they think they fit within their social structure, which is fine. However, what you're doing is you're voting for the same shit, just dressed up in a different colour rosette. Because what goes on is going to go on regardless of how you vote, and people can't wrap their head around that because they get wrapped up in the parties as if it was like a football match, a soccer match for our American friends, if you like, and it doesn't work like that. You've just got to look at the manifestos. You've just got to look at the wording that they use. Will have a moratorium on such. It's a wonderful word, isn't it? But
look at democracy. Blair, was the most right-wing, left-winger going, wasn't he? He's the one that just said, "Yes, Bush, I'll invade with you."
Democracy was invented by the Greeks, and that got punched out of them by the Romans when they got invaded.
Did you hear Tony Blair came out to try and give us all advice about the C word? Tony Blair did a report, didn't he, where he was trying to give us all advice about this current the current P word. Can't say either of those, can we? I just thought you're a war criminal. We don't need your advice on how to deal with something. You're no longer in power. Go away. Just frustrating. But he's still trying to put his 2 pence in. You've made millions from speeches. That was your back money from the companies that you passed the laws for while you're in power. Now go away and retire. But anyway,
it's true. All right then, guys. We'll call it an evening.
Yes.
Because as always, I need a wee.
Yeah, I'm about there.
You've got the bladder the size of a chickpea, everybody. That's what the issue is. He's drinking beer. He's I'm old. You're a baby. He's having a drink, so he's quite right. You've been there for 2 hours, brother. It's understandable, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a heavy subject and a big one, and I can't believe we've not. When we covered this, it's a 9-hour long series. So I think we've done amazing tonight. Yeah. But listen, guys, thanks as always. It's been really great to speak to you both, and everybody in the side chat tonight. You've been legendary this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Really, really interesting points made.
Really engaging and great points.
Yeah. You've done a great job. We should just leave it up to you lot.
Yeah. Definitely. And yes, we are missing Steve this evening, last minute technical issues, but I'm sure we'll get him back next week. Dave, we are over to you. Are you going to tell us what we're doing next week, or are you going to keep us in suspense?
I thought about keeping you in suspense, but then I thought, no, what I might do is throw a couple of ideas out. I'm a bad human being, guys. I'm a
Yes, we
bad
know.
human being. And we touched upon, well, we didn't touch upon, we sort of battered the hell out of the 411 cases not so long ago, which instigated a thought process about missing people in my head. And I know this is a bit of a controversial one, but I've always been interested in the Madeleine McCann case. I really have. It's just one of those things. So I'm thinking either that, or going back to the Voynich manuscript, because that still didn't get done. And I've got lots of pretty pictures and lots of research for that particular one. I can bore a lot of people with it. So you guys decide. People in the side chat decide, or you two guys, or give us
Leave a
some
comment.
indication.
I'm interested in the manuscript one particularly because I don't know anything about it. I mean, literally nothing. So I always like a new subject that I need to get my teeth into. I'm going to dig into it and then realize I do know stuff about it because stuff seeps into my brain sometimes, and then but I don't categorize it well.
Relatively in-depth manuscript covering several topics, relatively scientific related, with a lot of diagrams, geometric shapes, etc. running through it in a completely unknown language. That's of a culture that we have
I do know that
no
one.
idea what existed.
Is this the one that people can't? We don't know the language, and it's decoding it.
You can't decode it, can you?
Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I do know that one.
But you can decode it a little from a kind of understanding of the layout and the diagrams.
Here's Damian again, prematurely
jumping ahead.
Going off. Yeah. I can't help it. Interesting topic, the Voynich manuscript, as is 9/11.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course it is. Yeah, it's just banter. Everybody, we love one another, really. Apart from Steve, who's always absent without lead. What's going on, brother? It's not the same. Em's just made it. Madeleine McCann's parents were smart people. Yeah, you see that's the thing. You see, well, I don't know. Let me know what people think we should do, or we'll talk amongst ourselves about it. But both of them would be
definitely doing one of those. I already know. I'm pretty sure we're going to do Princess Diana in 2 weeks. So we're not going to do Princess Diana because she is dead. That
is on the list for Princess Diana as well. Yeah,
you could say she got done. That would be a more.
So that'll be us in 2 weeks. Back on our channel, but next week we're going to be over on Dave's channel, Darius Lives, and in the meantime, stay safe and do all that stuff.
R.I.P. to everybody who died as well, by the way.
Yeah, most definitely.
Be careful. If you can't be
careful, do the cheesy crap at the end. Please go to Darius Lives and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't go to Stranger Times because he couldn't be bothered to turn up.
Correct.
No, actually do. He's really close to 1,000, guys. So let's really give Steve one more push to get him over 1,000. He's been killing himself to do it for months now, and he's so close. So let's do that. I do have my T-shirt on, which I bought, which I've made. And if you're stupid enough to want to buy one, there's actually a link in the description. But I've got some quite good ones coming.
He has got some good designs. I've seen a couple of them now. They've been very.
In my other videos, we'll be seeing some of my new ones.
So kind to actually model them as well on behalf of himself there, which I kind of like. But I sort of did get my elbow in his ribs, everybody, by the way. So I know that everybody wants to get off about doing a Mystery Machine T-shirt as well, a bit of Mystery Machine merch. Okay. So what do you think about Mystery Machine merch? It can be anything, maybe even cups, badges, T-shirts. I've had a little bit of a look into things like that myself, and I'm going to confer with J Bomb and Damian Bomb. And see what the crack. Well, it says bomb. Doesn't
logo
it? Yeah, I know. Yeah, I did say that to Jamie when I said, "Oh, the acronym's BOMB." You don't want to go saying that too loudly in an airport.
Well, yeah, that's why I completely changed the logo though. So there's there you go. With it.
Excellent T-shirt.
Yeah, we're going to need a new logo. So if anybody's got any ideas, it's not the Riddler T-shirt, Bazza. He doesn't like this T-shirt. I love it. We're mysteries. That's the point. Yeah, it's a brief mystery of mysteries. That's a question mark. Makes sense, right? I was with it. I think it's quite really nice, this T-shirt.
I like it as well. Absolutely.
And I've got a couple of silly ones as well for my other channel. That's Sidetrack as well, guys. If you ever want to have a look at that, it's doing quite well. My Sidetrack channel, actually. I'm going to make Steve. I'm going to make Steve cry. I might hit 1,000 before he does. My channel's only 5 weeks old.
Yeah. So are you still there? Are you still there, stranger? What do you think about that?
Yeah, go on, Steve. What do you think, mate? If I let me just have a look how many subscribers I've got right now.
I'd laugh at just 1,001.
518 subscribers, and I've been going 5 weeks, so it's not doing too badly. It took me nearly 2 years to get 500 subscribers on A Brief History of Mystery. So, hey, who knew talking about films was more popular than talking about stuff that's actually real? But
People like to escape the real world because there's a lot of bullshit in the real world.
yeah. Oh, God. And that's why I love just popcorn movies. It's like, oh, it's got no Marvel films. They've got no layers to them because that's the point. I don't want to think.
Yeah,
I don't want to come away from a
as they
movie.
say, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's it.
Chewing gum for the eyes, yeah.
Definitely. I don't want to come away from a movie going, oh, that's touched me. I'm like, no, life touches me. I want something that makes me just go, that shit blew up. You know, I don't want it to be realistic. I want it to be get out there. But yes. Next couple of videos I've done on Sci Trek are the most evil bad guys or the most dangerous bad guys in sci-fi. And I've done I watched a movie called Space Truckers. You guys ever seen Space Truckers?
Yeah.
Terrible movie, but it's so bad.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So I've done a quick video on that as well. So, but anyway, let's say good evening and let everybody go. And to Bazza, I'm not doing an episode on the Teletubbies. But keep the ideas coming, mate. Keep the ideas coming. Good night, guys. Seriously.
Right,
Thank
See
you
you
very
later.
much.
Bye bye.
See you later.